So ended my 10-year-old defense of our perhaps most central spiritual ancestor, Jacob, the guy who later gets renamed Yisrael, Israel, from which the Jewish people take their name. I was in 4th grade in Cheder, 10 years old, in what we called Sunday school at my synagogue in Kansas City in the 1990s. And our best Cheder teacher, the eccentric, thoughtful Steve Sacken, had tasked us with a most memorable project. We, the young people in the class, were holding a court case to adjudicate the morality of the tale we just heard read today. When Jacob tricks Esau, his twin brother, out of first his birthright, as we read in this parsha as Rob laned, and then again later in this same Torah portion, which we did not read, when their mother Rebekah instructs Jacob to deceive their father Isaac into getting the firstborn son's blessing intended for Esau. This is a great rift between brothers, between the closest of family blood relations, that cries out from the Torah, because it has its echoes, as Rob pointed out, even all the way back in human history, the Torah tells us, before even Cain and Abel, the first human murder, all the way back to their parents, Adam and Eve, who are deceived by the snake in the garden and then tried to obfuscate responsibility when God finds out. Adam blaming his partner Eve, and Eve blaming the snake. Deception and blame and questions of family succession. Who is the favored child? Who is more loved, more recognized? Who is responsible? These are written deep into the DNA of the Torah, and I suspect deep into human DNA. I was a 10-year-old like many 10-year-olds. That is to say, I'd been told some of my national myths, that people settled the land in covered wagons, and I'd been told some of the myths of my particular community, that we were slaves in the land of Egypt, and I'd been told some of the myths of my family. We came to the United States to escape the pogroms. But I had not internalized many of the Torah stories because they seemed so opaque, so weird, so old, and sometimes impossible to understand, or at worst, irrelevant. I think of this fact every time a bar bat mitzvah young person stumbles through reading the English, not even the Hebrew, of their Torah portion. All those foreign-sounding names and these and thous, and references to references to references, it seems we could never hope to understand. And I also think of this, the difficulty of bringing our Jewish myths close, of understanding them, every time I talk to us Jewish and non-Jewish adults as well. A young member of our community wrote me just recently to say, to even be a Jew or one of God's chosen people, you must follow the mitzvot. However, some of the laws are really weird. Another said to me the other day, I see this whole thing totally differently from my partner. We don't even see our Jewishness in the same way. Another bat mitzvah student reasonably declared to me, I don't believe in these stories. Well, what does it mean to believe in these stories? I think my Cheder teacher, Steve Sacken, all those years ago, understood something of what that might mean. He declared that I was the defense attorney for Jacob, that another one of our more keen classmates was the prosecution, arguing Esau's very reasonable case, that he'd been screwed out of something that was rightly his. Another played Jacob, another Esau, another their blind father Isaac, another their mother Rebekah, another God. We had to go to the synagogue library, I remember, and do research, learning along the way that all the Jewish commentators and scholars had wildly divergent opinions about who was right in this story, who wrong, about their motivations, why they were making the choices that they did. On the one hand, the Jewish tradition seems to back Jacob up, as does the Torah's language in some ways. Rebekah, their mother, appears to be doing God's will when she instructs Jacob to wrest the blessing away from his twin, Esau. But the Torah, on the other hand, in great mythic and storytelling fashion, is not univocal on this. It doesn't just say, top marks, Rebekah was right, story done. For we learn later that Esau, the wronged party in this story, had a grandson, Amalek, who would go on to be the founder of another people, the Amalekites. And the Amalekites are set up in our Torah stories as the Daleks, to forever and always oppose the Jewish people, to be our number one nemesis in the world. And the heavy implication here is that guess what? The enemies you make are often, sometimes, in part, your fault. We, the Jewish people, descendants of Jacob, messed up first. This founding enmity between us and the Amalekites can be traced back to Esau's despairing wail when Jacob runs off with his inheritance, his birthright. Have you no blessing for me, Father, cries Esau. And it is we who know we are guilty. Deception and hurt begets deception and hurt, says the Torah. Things are not so simple. Steve Sacken knew we needed to inhabit our stories, somehow to find a way in. So what does it mean to believe in these stories? It means to inhabit them, to embody them, to come closer to them, to struggle with them, and hate the ones that make you angry, that seem unjust or wrong, and to be moved and love the ones that speak to you, and to return to them again and again, as we do in our Torah reading every Shabbat morning, and at the Passover Seder table, and in Cheder, and when the Exodus is referenced in the morning papers, or in literature, or in politics. To think about how these deep myths intersect with our lives, or could. Another member of the community said to me recently about a Jewish adjacent issue, I realized I can't not be involved. It's my birthright. We are bound by our choices to be counted in this Jewish storytelling project. I was a bit embarrassed, I remember that day at 10 years old, to have to defend Jacob's actions. They are, one could argue, indefensible. And even in that strong emotion, embarrassment, I was already part of the story. That's investment. Anger is investment. Frustration is investment. Confusion is investment. All are valid emotions to feel toward the Jewish tradition and its stories. And so too are love and inspiration and comfort. Shabbat Shalom.